Yeah, we're ready to go.
What is this?
Who passed that on?
That's mine.
Oh.
I already showed it to Brian.
Good.
All right.
You?
Sir.
How you doing? Doing good.
I decided that one was worth printing out. So we have all of our troops assembled.
Yes, sir.
I believe so.
All right, it's 4 o'clock, and let's call this meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor McGill,
Here.
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Pinkston,
Here.
Mayor Snook,
Here?
Vice Mayor Wade.
Here.
Okay, we're all here, that's great. Is there a motion to approve or to amend the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. This meeting, as always, will be divided into 3 main sections. First is a work session to hear and discuss presentations that do not require a vote by council. That typically runs us to about 5:30 or so. That will be followed by a closed meeting from about 5:30 to roughly 6:30, and then the city council business meeting, which we hope will begin around 6:30. There is seating available in the council chambers for up to 23 pre-registered attendees and media. Others are able to join electronically by Zoom. So we hope that you will join us either in person or by Zoom. We have 2 reports on the agenda for this 4 o'clock agenda. The first is a report from the Vibrant Community Fund for fiscal year 24. Misty Graves, Director of Human Services, will present to us. Misty, take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. I have a PowerPoint that I'll just share screen quickly, if I may.
There you go.
Just to keep us on track for the conversation today, I'm joined by Hunter Smith, who's the Human Services Planner who oversees the Vibrant Community Fund process.
Great.
And the last time that we were here at the second meeting in September 19th, and we shared with you all at that time a report on adjustments that we made to this fiscal year 24's Vibrant Community Fund process to offer the community an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the process and some of those changes ahead of releasing the application. And since then, we've released our RFP on October 5th when the applications opened, and they closed on November 9th. We offered orientation to all potential applicants in person and via Zoom as a hybrid option on October 4th at City Space. And we also recorded that for folks who are unable to attend but could still access the orientation. And soon after that, about a week later, we hosted a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop for all potential applicants in person and hybrid with Zoom on October 11th, also at City Space. Both of those opportunities were very well attended by potential applicants. And in addition to that, this year, Hunter hosted several office hours where folks could come for a drop-in period of 2 hours at 4 different occasions if folks had questions about the application or the process. And then he remained available ongoing with email and phone calls as they needed technical support. We also, since that time we came into September, we selected 16 citizen members of the review teams, and includes some city staff, but also with other lived experience as consumers of nonprofits and those with nonprofit experience. So we've also had our orientation as a review team, and we are ready to start reviewing these applications. And during that meeting in September, at the end of that, we offered to come back to share an update with you about numbers of applicants, what sort of categories they fall in, and sort of a update on what the funding amounts that have been requested. So I'm gonna toss it over to Hunter to give you more of those details.
Hello, everyone, and good to virtually see everyone and be part of this. So this is a quick side-by-side comparison of FY23 to FY24 applications, and then what we're seeing. As you can see, last year we had 28 applications in the Vibrant Community Fund pool. This year we have 50. This does take out any of the what we call contractual or intergovernmental. This is strictly Vibrant Community Fund, traditional applications with new and emerging in there. Last year we had 3 new and emerging applications. This year we had 12, and the total ask, as you can see, has significantly increased. Part of what we were doing this year is try to include more transparency and be more kind of involved with the community as to when the application was open and who it was for. Looks like we were successful with that in terms of how many applicants we have, but that also ended up with a larger total ask, as you can see in the 3rd bullet. And we currently have the same allocated amount of money to share with these applicants and organizations that we have in the last bullet there.
And I would just add as a reminder, one of the changes that we presented in September was that we moved all the housing and homelessness services applicants over to the Office of Community Solutions. So this analysis also does not include the housing and homelessness services providers, since they're going through a different process. So we wanted to compare apples to apples as much as possible.
All right, thank you. Next slide, Misty. And this is a little bit more closer evaluation of the general status currently. In the education, youth, and family category, we had 17 applications. Economic impact and jobs, we had 7. In the health and safety category, we had 13 applicants. New and emerging, we had 12 total. Those are a mixture of the other 3. So anybody that's new and emerging had to also select either education, youth and family, economic impact and jobs, or health and safety. So it was a mixture of the new and emerging applicants in there. And then we have what we were calling our fundamental applications, or 11 of those. Those were the groups that we discussed at the first meeting that we're not going to go through the formal review process. They're going to fall into the automatic, top gear. It's some of the OER programs, Foothills, health, dental and health clinic, I think is what we're talking about there. And maybe one more extra, but that's the shelter for help and emergency is the other one that's in that category. And so you can see the total ask here. The review teams are going to be reviewing, meeting, and scoring this month and probably into the beginning of January. And then after that's wrapped up, we're going to look at the funding rubric and with the budget team come up with recommendations, all leading up to the council budget work session, which is March. So currently we are doodle polling, organizing meetings. The review teams are reading applications, and then we're moving towards having a recommendation for you guys after the new year. So.
Just a couple more discussion points. There's a range of asks from organizations this year, ranging from about $5,000 all the way up to $335,000. The new and emerging category, we saw requests or asks for $10,000 to about $350,000. Depending on how we evaluate funding recommendations versus how much their asks are, we take into consideration the scope of that organization's work, how many recipients they serve, their quality of the program and the quality of their application, and their ability to meet outcomes and council priorities. Each evaluated section gets a percentage of their asks, and the percentages are set every year based on the availability of funds and the amount that's been requested. So I guess we're here today to hopefully gauge some feedback from you all. At this point, without any changes to the current, flat allocation of funds to the Vibrant Community Fund, organizations are going to expect to get significantly less than their asks. So we have the pro side of things, in which our process is more inclusive of a variety of different organizations that do incredible work in the community. We make determinations on how much organizations get of their ask. So some of the 2 questions here that we have for you all to consider and hopefully share feedback on have you all considered any sort of limits or parameters that you would like the review teams to factor into their reviews? And have you considered any additional funds or sources of funds that could help support the Vibrant Community Fund? And if it's okay, I can stop sharing unless you want me to review any of the other slides.
Ms. Graves, could you go back to one of the earlier slides, I guess maybe the first or second? Yes.
This one?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So 2023 was the last, well, I guess this fiscal year that we're in now. And 1.9 is what we allocated.
That's correct.
2024 would be for the next. Can someone help me remember, have we talked about what that total allocation was going to be? I don't remember.
No, I'm sorry.
I was just going to
This
say, do we know the total
don't know
allocation?
that.
When was the last time it changed?
This is where I like to phone a friend. Her name is Chrissy Hamill.
So I think essentially the correct answer is that allocation hasn't changed dramatically for quite some years. We have bumped it up slightly, but for the most part, in working through the awards for after the applications are scored, we've basically tried to hold that funding amount as level. I think last year overall, we had just under, for all of the groups in the base budget, there was, just under $2.5 million in funding. Now, 575 of that we pulled out because that's going to go into the CAF for the housing applications. So that would be, that's part of the feedback we're looking for for council as to, if there's some amount that you're looking to fund, or what is your philosophy in terms of how you would like to approach that?
So this is already apples to apples in terms of taking out the housing piece.
That's correct.
Okay.
As much as possible, yes.
Right.
We also,
I can add.
go ahead, Connor.
But I also didn't even, the arts applications come in differently. And so I just realized I have not added that into these numbers. I can send out an updated total. And maybe while you guys are talking, I can go try to figure out how much that is, but it doesn't come under Zoom grants. It comes in individually to me as PDFs. And so I just realized I haven't added that to the.
Well, we're not going to be
I
making a
don't know
decision
about
tonight anyway, so.
I'm sorry. I don't know about this year, but last year we received just over 320,000 in arts and culture, and we were able to fund about 154,000 of that.
It should be in that same. It should be in that same general amount. My apologies, council, for not adding that to the presentation.
So we've been at roughly $2 million for
Few years.
a number
Many
of
years.
I wonder if there's a way, I mean, if you think about what inflation has been like over the last years, I mean, that's essentially less money in real terms.
I'm sure it'd be easy enough to figure that out. It's not.
I'm just wondering if we should build in a kind of step increase, something like that. Not
Well-
a COLA, because that would be too low, but something where at least the real amount of money doesn't go down.
And maybe one of the things that we would say to the city manager is, as you're trying to figure out where the last $1 million or so might go, consider some of this. And I don't think we want to try to be saying to the Vibrant Community Fund people right now,
Okay.
hey, we know we're going to, not 1.9, but now we're making it 2.9.
Okay.
I have no idea. The city manager's sitting over there with Cheshire Cat grin on his face.
Saying no.
Well, the one thing we know is that inflation is hitting everything that the city does. And we also know that we are going to have substantial issues with pay for people and employees who, number one, expect to get paid, but number two, who need to get hired, who haven't been hired for the last few years. I am concerned that when we're looking at $4.3 million being asked for here, and let's assume for the moment that most of these people are competent at their job of writing grants and so on, there will be reasonably attractive grants. I mean, just figuring hypothetically $3 million worth. If we only have $2 million, then that necessarily means that even the best grants on our apportionment model wouldn't get full funding or potentially even close to full funding. I guess one of the questions I had is there an opportunity, excuse me, is there an opportunity in your process for basically saying, let's say somebody says, I want $200,000 because I want to serve 100 people at $2,000 a person. And supposing you said, you know, this is a great program, we're only going to fund 50 of them. We're only going to fund you $100,000, but we'll give you all of that $100,000. Instead of saying, sort of cutting people back by saying, we're cutting you back from 200 to 100, and that implies some judgment that we don't like you or that you didn't do a good job in your application or whatever. I have a sense that, and I've talked to some people who have been involved with this process who've said, well, if they're going to give us 60% of what we want, I just need to ask for 50% more than I asked for before. And at some point that, I mean, I know of a couple of places last year who did so in a way that didn't work out very well for them. But in some other places, maybe it, I don't know, I just don't know how to evaluate that, and whether we're doing anybody a service by saying, great program, giving you 90%, or whether we should, to more groups, say, great program, but we're not going to fund your request as much as you'd like. We're going to give you 50%, but it's not because we don't like you. It's because we've got too many other competing needs.
So that's definitely an approach that, you know, some places take. You know, I know that you can say, we're just really going to focus on, we can't do everything. We're going to focus on one or two focus areas and the programs that application that address that, and that's what we're going to focus on. Not that the other things aren't important, but this is what we're going to do for a few years or something. But I think that that's a really thoughtful discussion that, you know, we're going to have, and I'm not sure if we can do it at this point because applications have already been submitted. I mean,
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that I've thought about in our process is that the Vibrant Community Fund has, the committee has tended to write us this nice big report, and it's sort of a fire and forget thing. We have no further interaction with them. And if we were to receive it, let's say in the last week in February or whenever it was we typically get it, maybe it's earlier in February, and we look at it and we say, you know, supposing, VCF committee, supposing we said, we're sorry, we really only have, if the city manager tells us we really only have $2 million to spend. We don't have $3 million to spend. And these are, but here are some priorities. Can we give them some feedback in mid-process so that they can then take that feedback into account and reevaluate or reapportion or do their jobs? I want to respect the work and the analysis that they do, and I really don't want us to be having to do that same work. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like we ought to at some point be able to give them some guidance midstream.
Well, I'm not sure if I agree with that for someone who's not personally written a lot of them, but if you have nonprofits that's worked hard looking at our guidelines and say, okay, well, this was I'm going to write towards, and now we're going to change the rules or modify them after they've been submitted. If I were someone that submitted an application, I'm like, well, if I had known that, I would have done A, B, and C, and that just may give them more headache, the committee, then it may make things easier for them. So I understand what you're saying, but I think that I like to get to the point where we give them guidance up front enough that once they give their recommendation, we as counselors we can say, we approve it or support it. You all did put the work in of reviewing applications for hours and hours and things. I know that's what I did for, I don't know, 20 years or so, for the whole process, looking at all the different applications. And I understood there was political, that counselors, you all or we all, always would get requests afterwards to change and not, but I think that, trust me, we put the hours in, they put the hours in to review them, and I think best we can respect their work. And I'm not saying that you're saying that they're not, but I just wouldn't agree with changing the rules midstream at this point. So
I'm not suggesting changing rules necessarily, but I think first of all, no applicant has a right by contract or anything else to a particular formulation of how we make our minds up. Okay? Now, they may feel it's unfair if we say, oh, well, okay, we're now telling you that we're rewarding those people who put in this factor and you didn't put in that factor. We didn't tell you needed to, but boy, we really like that. That's the kind of changing the rules that I think they would legitimately be concerned about. But if we're trying to figure out a way to apportion scarce dollars, I don't really think that it's their issue whether we look at it and say, we've got too many requests. We've got to figure out a better way to do this.
But I thought that's what the team was going to be doing. They were going to be making those hard calls for us, asking us to sort of validate that. But
the problem with the way we've got it is, let's say you've got, $1.5 million worth of requests that would qualify as 1A, strong exemplary programs. And that would, if we were to fund them at the rate we typically fund them, 90% plus, then that's $1.3 million, and that uses up 2/3 of the money, and we don't even get close to the other people. So what do? Do we reduce the 90% to 60% in a way to balance everything out? Or do we say, maybe we would want to make a decision that would say, we would rather give money to the strong and exemplary programs only, and not to the others. There's a lot of ways I think that maybe the process would work better if we gave the VCF committee some feedback once we saw sort of the initial round of what they're talking about, and then let them process that and make their recommendations to us. Again, I really don't want us to be in the business of reviewing applications, but I also think that it's kind of handicapping to us to say we're stuck with that level of recommendation or the kinds of recommendations we're getting. I've been frustrated for the last few years that we have sort of tied our own hands in ways that just feel very unsatisfying.
well, if I could ask Ms. Graves,
Sure.
what would be involved in sort of giving us an update, say in January, where y'all stand with all this and how you think the allocations are going?
Well, in January, we'll still be working with our review teams to
Okay.
get the scores figured out. So the earliest in which we would be able to know what the scores are and how folks kind of fall in that preliminary 1A, 2A category matrix. The earliest that would be able to do that would be February.
Okay.
And the kinds of recommendations that we're looking for are kind of what you're already sort of tossing around. Do you select a certain percentage for a certain category? Do you want to make your dollars stretch to more organizations, or do you want to focus on a certain evaluation criteria? Because we can come up with scenarios that say, A, this funding breakdown can get your funds to 80% of the applicants, 20% might not get funding at all. Or we can work out a scenario in which you give us guidance and you say, we are only going to fund 1A and 1B category, and then we work with what we have. But currently, what we have is we'll just do what we did last year. But that's why we're here in December, which is unusual, I think,
Right.
for the committee to come in December to ask for that kind of feedback. But I understand that this is, sort of new to kind of get that pulse check at several intervals. And so I don't expect you all to have an answer right now. But it would be good to know, as we conclude the scores, what kind of funding matrix you want to see, because we can run several scenarios. And Hunter, did I just?
I was going to add a couple quick things. I will say that during the entire process for all the applicants, I make it very, very clear. I made it very, very clear on numerous occasions as to the increase in number of applications, and let people know that the more that we have, often the less there will be for each application. So I know I said that at least 25. I mean, I put it out everywhere so that people understand how this particular process works. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't really make the decision making any better or different. But I do my best to be as transparent as I can as I see applications coming in, to communicate to the applicants what the outcomes may be. And if we do decide to change the way that we allocate the money, we can keep it'd just be important for me to keep in touch with the applicants as we're changing things or updating things. And it is new. I think providing the updates at different points of the process does change the nature a little bit. It allows us to have more conversation around it and to look at it differently. But I think we had a bigger increase in total applicants and asks than we anticipated. And that definitely adds some heat to the conversation, I think, at this point when you're looking at the totals. But I just appreciate the chance to talk to everybody and kick ideas around. But I did want to address your point, Mayor Snook, about what applicants may be, expecting, and then our job as the facilitators to inform applicants as to what may happen, best case, worst case scenario in the spring. So, for whatever it's worth, I just wanted to add that.
So if you came back in February with sort of another update with scores at that point, would that be a point, Mayor or others, when you think we could have another crack at sort of directing them, not in terms of scoring, but just in terms of how we want to lay out the money? I mean, the
So
scoring
if I
piece.
can just interject on that one point, we basically will have to have the budget pretty much balanced by February 15th. And so that's just for the city manager's proposed budget. Now, of course, whatever, that will be presented to you in early March. And then whatever you all decide you want to do with that, you can certainly do that throughout the month of March, and that becomes your adopted budget. But I think, the bigger question for now is, are you looking to start this process with a level funding amount built in the budget for a vibrant community? Or are you saying you want us to look to increase that in some way so that we can put that into the budget? But February is going to kind of be too late for the proposed.
Well, I think, I mean, I think what we're talking about is assuming a fixed number of 1.9 or whatever that total allocation is, which would let you balance your budget within that allocation, the sort of distribution of things that have been described. I think that could happen at the same time, because you're only concerned about the bottom line number for purposes of the city manager's budget, correct?
Correct. So, I mean, if the 1.9 is what you want us to work with, that's great. If the message is, hey, maybe we want to increase that a little bit, we just need to get that indication.
Well, my own view is we should increase it.
Yeah, if you're just looking for a kind of big picture type of thing, I would definitely like to see a few more dollars added to that 1.9 allocation. So
Waiting.
If it's been 1.9 for 5 years, I'm not saying we have to adjust it for inflation, but I mean, that, in real terms, that amount of money is less. So it's not really true that we're level pegging. We're actually funding our partners with
Why don't we
less.
hear from the other wing here?
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe
I
I
have-
am the left wing over here.
I have a problem with the fact that it has stayed level for years. I think we need to be factoring in some sort of expected yearly increase, because the need keeps increasing in our community, while the usable dollars keep in function decreasing. I also think we need to be, I don't know if we have in process in Vibrant Community, a part of the reporting function that asks a nonprofit how they have used previous city dollars in the past and how that has met the community need that they say they are addressing. This has been an issue, I know, for quite a while, in how to measure that and how to get people to report that. And the one is the nonprofit actually doing the end result of work that they are trying to do. And sometimes when we have given from other areas of our budget, it kind of goes into a black hole, and we haven't really a good reporting mechanism coming back for what did our citizens get for that investment. So I have those 2 points there of, one, I think we need to have a permanent ability to be able to raise this line item. But also, how is it that we are tracking the results of what we're investing in?
I can share some additional information about that. This year, we added as part of our funding agreements that individual organizations would share an update with us quarterly on how things are going, what they spent the funds on, how much they've spent in their allocation for that quarter, and any sort of highlights or challenges that have come up in which we might offer some support in helping them meet their goals if they haven't met them yet. And in their this is our first go at that, it's a new tool that we're using, and currently we're looking to have we would need additional staff capacity in order to review those with detail. And but we do have our partners, or the organizations do have the ability to submit their reports quarterly. And also in their application for this current year, they will be able to report on how they met their goals for FY22, and that factors in how they get scored. So there's a couple places on the metrics system in which we evaluate how well they were able to meet their goals. And there's also an opportunity for them to say, if you didn't meet your outcomes, please explain why.
So that funding, would that be, is it only from the Vibrant Community Grant area though, or would it be from any other pot of money that the city had that nonprofit might have received money from in the past?
I can only speak to human services, so this was a pilot of being able to do that with Vibrant Community Fund recipients.
Mr. Payne, what do you think?
Well, I guess some thoughts on what's been discussed is one, I mean, I think clearly more money is needed overall for the Vibrant Community Fund and has been for some time. I know that's something we've discussed in years past, but didn't really go anywhere. That said, I watched the budget work session with the Planning Commission, and I recognize where we're going to find that money is we don't have an answer to that currently. Secondly, to the mayor's point about kind of the flexibility in the process, I think I would agree with the mayor's points. As I've said before, I think it's good for us to have some level of flexibility in this process, because to me, a process that works extremely well would kind of get it right 90% of the time, but there's still going to be some edge cases where I think it does give us some value added to have a little bit of flexibility. And that's no knock on this process or the work that's gone into it. I think it's just the nature of the beast. And then finally, I don't really know what the solution or answer to this is, but in the discussion, I guess one of my concerns is I know the reason that we made all these changes to this process was to try to have a way to make investments that had a measurable, more impactful benefit to the community than what we were doing before. And maybe I misinterpreted what I was hearing, but it sounds like with this surge in new requests, we've got a much greater risk of kind of returning to where we were in the past, where we kind of spread a small amount of money out to a ton of different requests instead of investing all in on several requests. And that may put us in a situation where there's less impact from the money we invest because we're not able to have, we're just giving money for the sake of, you know, trying to meet as many people who send a request rather than, okay, if we fully invest in this, we know that it will have the largest measurable impact. But I guess that's one of the consequences of not investing more over several years. But
Would it be possible to ask the city manager to consider a 5% increase to the total or 10% increase to the total and see how that factors into his overall proposed budget?
Noted.
I mean, I would love to see 10%, but I can, you know, I get it. We're in hard times.
I don't think it's unreasonable to try to see how we could get there. But I don't have any, having watched that budget work session, I don't have any illusions about kind of what kind of budget season we're in. Given what we've already invested in, some of the inflation, just year over year costs have gone up about 40%.
Well, if anyone can figure it out, Ms. Hamill can figure it out.
The one thing that I guess I'm thinking about is whether we want to say that we want to make sure that we allocate at least, 20%, 25%, some number for the new and emerging programs. That strikes me as a different category that we asked you all to keep separate and to make a plug for separately. And I would hate to see those programs get sort of swallowed up by all these other demands. Can you think of a good way to do that would be workable?
I think that can be workable. I mean, I can let Hunter chime in as well, but the new emerging is an opportunity for our local government to consider equity and the diversity in applicants and recipients. So it would be important to look at those separately and differently in order to meet that goal. Hunter can chime in if he like.
No, I think that, yeah, I don't really have I can't really spit out a specific like a process or
I'm not asking you to write the regulation here and now, but
Right, but I do think there's a way for us to kind of like place value on the new and emerging group and to see what we can come up with the numbers that we have to not have them, as you say, get swallowed up in the process, because there's some really interesting applicants in that particular category this year.
And I guess
But
what I would
I've
say
been
is,
taking that. There may be a way to make this work out. And Misty and I are gonna like probably come after this. Probably tomorrow, gonna circle back and kick some things around. But I think there's a way to tweak it a little bit to make it more efficient and effective for what I'm hearing.
and what I was going to say, maybe maybe you don't want to designate a particular percentage in advance, but you look at everything at the end of things and you say, okay, we want to make sure that we fund a certain amount of these new projects. I don't know. I have some flexibility, but do it. Would be sort of my suggestion.
I also
Understood.
get concerned. I really understand what Councilor Payne is saying, but I do get concerned if we have organizations that can take a small amount from the government and leverage that for multiple different grants, showing, because I know in the nonprofit field, a lot of times having a small amount from the local government can bring in a lot more than it actually.
Yeah.
I want to be careful that we don't end up costing a community partner who's doing good work. And again, I want to make sure that it's a partner that we feel like is doing good work, but that maybe $5,000 or $10,000 donation or impact that we have with them is then not costing them, if we withdraw that, is not going to cost them $50,000, $60,000, $70,000.
There is a place in the application where folks can talk about what would happen if they were not funded at their full amount. And then there's also an additional place that says, also, please indicate if this funding from local government is required for a match to a grant. So we should have a heads up on who those folks are if they answered those questions completely.
Thank you. I just want to make sure we're I'm sure you are. I just want to bring that forward that.
Sure.
Yeah. And I would say, sort of paralleling that thought, that if I'm using round numbers here, if a $10,000 grant from the city, they've asked for $100,000, but if a $10,000 grant allows them to get something brought down from another agency, and we wouldn't necessarily want to be funding them at $100,000, or we wouldn't receive favorably the application for $100,000, maybe there's a piece of it that we can say, okay, you show up as a 2B or a 2C or something like that, but we really want you to get your $10,000. I sometimes think that our categorizing the 2Bs and 2Cs and 3As and so on gets us stuck. And I would encourage you to do something, to figure out whether there is perhaps a way to do something that allows a little flexibility there. Anyway, I'm sure that's very confusing to you and not really very much guidance, but.
I can add, Mayor Snook, that one part of as we do this, there is a part of the process where I'm in contact with the applicants, and there's probably opportunity for me to ask some of those questions based on the application and what we learned about it. There's probably a way for me to I can't say it's a technical feature of the review process, but that's something I've been considering, is asking some of those questions this time, what would this mean, or how would this impact you, just to maybe get a sense of that. But It's not at this point built into the system to do it, just like you said, but there are options within how we do it to communicate with the applicant during the review process to figure some of those things out that may help with the decision-making process on some level.
Well, I appreciate all of the work that you all have done and are obviously going to yet have to do, and I hope we don't end up adding too much to it. I find myself in the position of both wanting not for us to insert ourselves into the decision-making process, and not wanting to make us go read applications and so on, but somehow wanting you to divine the flexibility that we're trying to suggest. And I have
I
great
take
faith
as
in
many
you all
notes as
to
I can.
figure out a
Just keep taking
process that seems fair to do that. Are there
It
other
is
comments?
complicated, but it's good work and it's worth the challenge. So appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all very much.
Other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like I say,
Yeah, thank you
lots
all.
of work, and we know we're going to see lots more work, and it's good stuff. Thanks. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So our next item on this 4 o'clock agenda is the report on our annual financial audit for fiscal year 2022 from our auditors. And Mr. Cullinan, I see, is with us, and some folks who look very much like auditors on the other side of the screen.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Chris Cullinan, the city's Director of Finance. This agenda item is a report on the annual financial audit for fiscal year 2020 from the city's auditors. The Code of Virginia requires that localities have all of their accounts and records audited annually as of June 30th by an independent certified public accountant in accordance with the specifications furnished by the Auditor of Public Accounts. State code also requires that the city's auditor report to the governing body at a public session. This afternoon, we're joined by Matthew McLaren and Michael Lupton from Robinson Farmer Cox and Associates, who will be presenting their report to council. Once they've completed their report, I'll provide a summary of the year-end results of the general fund and next steps. So Matthew and Michael, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. My name is Matt McLaren, and with me this evening is Michael Lupton. We both serve as partners for the audit engagement and have direct supervision of the audit process. The presentation this evening is going to focus on two areas. The first being the communication that is required in professional standards from an auditor to the governing body. The second part will be to briefly communicate the audit results, and that is in the form of an opinion on the financial statements as well as in the audit findings that we may have had. Just very briefly about the audit process, it is conducted over a 3 to 4 week period. We have a team of about between 6 and 7 auditors on the site in the field, actually testing documents and balances and internal controls and providing audit confirmations to be sent out. During that process, we're required on professional standards to conduct our audit in accordance with generally accepted audit standards, government audit standards, as well as the audit specifications as outlined by the Auditor of Public Accounts. With all that said, we conduct our audits, we conclude on those audit tests, and we provide an opinion in the form of a 2 to 3 page letter that is included in the annual comprehensive financial report that the city issues. To talk very briefly about the required communications, professional standards require that we communicate very specific items. I'm going to communicate those verbally to council at this time, but I'll also follow up with a written documentation that will be provided summarizing the same points. Starting with the first point, this letter to be issued will communicate responsibilities under the audit. Management of the city has a very critical role in the audit process. The auditor, everyone knows what we do. We test the documents, we test the balances, we opine on the financial statements. But management also has a very important role in the audit process. Most importantly, maintaining internal controls, a system of accounting, issuing records to be audited. Additionally, management is required to implement new accounting standards. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board is the overarching board that issues accounting pronouncements for all governmental entities as well as those that follow governmental standards. Most importantly for fiscal year 2022 was Governmental Accounting Standard Statement number 87. This was a statement that was issued about 4 years ago, but was required to be implemented for fiscal year 22. There was a brief delay during the pandemic for the implementation of the standard. It's a quite lengthy standard, which is why I was making a point in mentioning that this evening. The lease standard focused on reporting leases. Historically, leases were reported only to the extent that they were what was termed a capital lease. A capital lease being basically a note purchase agreement for a tangible item. this standard requires now that operating leases, so a lease of something that the city may or may not own, be recorded and reported in the financial statements. Again, it was a very significant undertaking. The city's finance department accomplished that goal and has properly and accurately reported the financial statement number 87. We're also required to communicate matters regarding accounting estimates. As with most audited financial statements, estimates are used in preparation of those statements. The most significant estimates in the city's financial statements are estimates related to depreciable lives of the capital assets, estimates about net pension and OPEB liabilities, and estimates regarding any allowance for uncollectible accounts. The next item, we're required to communicate any difficulties encountered to perform the audit. Just as it sounds, we're required to communicate to the governing body, the city council, the difficulties we had during the course of the audit process. Please report we had no difficulties requiring disclosure to the city council. The next item, to be communicated corrected and uncorrected misstatements. Most audits do include a proposed audit adjustment list. That is a normal course of the audit process. We're also required to disclose any audit adjustment that we propose to city management that they did not correct or did not include the financial statements. And please report that there were no uncorrected misstatements for fiscal year 2022. The next item required to communicate is disagreements in applying accounting principles or any disagreements as it relates to the audit process with city management. And please report that there were no disagreements during the course of the audit. And lastly, we're required to disclose any significant audit findings that we had. Please report there were no significant audit findings for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. That concludes the required communications. And very briefly talk about the audit results. As I mentioned, the audit results are summarized in a 2 to 3 page report that is included within the annual comprehensive financial report. Please report that we've issued an unmodified or clean opinion for the financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. That concludes my remarks, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to, at this point, thank the finance director and his department for the assistance during this audit process, and all those departments, including the budget and treasurer's office, that also assisted.
Thank you. Any questions for the auditors?
No, it sounds great, and sounds like everything's clean, which which is not a surprise. But you know, during your work on our budget and during the audit, was there anything that gave you cause or concern? Not now, but if we don't change something, maybe a year or two down the road.
You know, I think that's a great question. So a lot of our audit process focuses on the test of controls and things like that. I think the city, as it exists, has, you know, sufficient controls in place over financial reporting. Also, you know, I think the director of finance will speak to the financial condition. I'm not sure if the question relates to that or not, but I think he'll speak to that. But once the financial report is released, I think you'll see there's a positive increase in the general fund balance.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No, I don't have any. I'm just thank you for your report and congratulations to the finance team for their hard work.
I will second that.
Mr. Mayor, once we receive the copies and we've had an opportunity to review it, we will be coming back to you as we discussed during the budget process with a full picture of the options we have based on the increase in fund balance.
And do you expect that will be at the next meeting in December? Will it be-
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it will be.
All right. So
Anything else, Chris?
The only thing that I'll add is, first of all, again, thank you to Matthew and Michael and their team at RFC for their assistance to this process and leading us through it. I'm thankful to them. Also thankful to the finance staff as well. for their efforts, both during the year-end process and the audit, but for what they do every day to maintain the integrity of the city's finances. The one thing I'll offer is that the annual comprehensive financial report will be available on the city's website, most likely by tomorrow. We just finished that up today, and we'll also have a handful of hard copies available upon request.
Thank you, sir.
So just, I know we've sort of couched this in sort of vague kind of language, but bottom line is we anticipate that the numbers that we will receive shortly will show a significant fund balance that, much as we had suggested we would have 8 months ago when we were in the budgeting process.
Yes, it will be a fund balance, as I understand it, that will be beyond what we discussed when we adopted the budget, and that is positive, so.
And that the other piece that's important is that that was all generated by proper accounting procedures, and there's nothing irregular in the process, and that's what the auditors are telling us tonight.
That's correct.
Good, okay. Questions, comments? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. And
Thank you. Absolutely.
appreciate the hard work.
Thank you. Certainly. Thank you.
So, those are the two items that were on our agenda for 4 o'clock. Is there anything else we need to do before we go back into closed session?
Beyond read this.
Please do.
Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that the City Council close this open meeting and convene within a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 for discussion or consideration of applicants for appointment to the Charlottesville Police Civilian Oversight Board, and discussion and consideration of the candidate proposed by the city manager for appointment as chief of police.
Second?
Okay, so discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Council is now in closed session. We'll return. It'll be a separate Zoom link if you're following by Zoom for the open meeting at 6:30. See you all in another hour and a half. Thank you.